Oli here, and this is my review of Colony in Space, the fourth story of the eighth season of classic Doctor Who, starring John Pertwee as the third Doctor. The Colony in Space is the 58th story overall. It's 6 episodes long and is written by Malcolm Hawke. This is also the first time that the Doctor is allowed to go out of Earth during his exile, but he has to do missions for the Time Lords, and then when the job is done, he has to come back to Earth and continue his exile. This becomes more common in the following season, so the plot of the story is as follows. The Time Lords discover that the Master has stolen secret information about a device called the Doomsday Weapon, and realize they need the exiled Doctor's help. They send the TARDIS, along with the Doctor and his assistant Joe Grant, to the bleak planet Usarius in the middle of the 25th century, where all is not well. What is attacking the colonists, and can the Doctor stop his old enemy from finding the dangerous weapon before it's too late? Space is a story that appears rather low in Pertwee rankings, and it is considered to be one of his worst stories, but in my opinion, I think The Colony in Space is actually one of his criminally underrated stories ever. It does have its faults, but I don't really understand how it's considered to be the worst, in my opinion. The story's production is rather decent. The attempt is there. I liked how Doctor Who has actually gone back to its whole alien quarry planets once again, and the filming of this quarry was actually quite cool, and I liked it. I liked the music that was played and the props that were used, such as the IMC robot that was used to attack the Doctor at the end of episode 1. And I liked the alien caves that the Uxarian aliens were there, such as the Guardian and the alien priest that was there. It looked rather nice, and we also had the Master's interior of the TARDIS, which we actually see for the first time ever, and it looked really impressive compared to the Doctor's TARDIS. It actually looks a lot better because obviously the Master's evil, so obviously it has to look better, and yeah, that's the reason why I actually think it looks impressive. The direction by Michael Bryant was okay, not his best, and he was actually responsible for that bit when the TARDIS was taking off in episode 1. The TARDIS it doesn't just fade away, it just goes whoop and it just disappears on screen, and then just like that, and it just in a minute's time it just appears on Xeris like that as well. And it does take off from Xeris like that, and then when it leaves Xeris it does the same thing. So I don't know. I think this is his first time directing, so I didn't really think he understood what the TARDIS was actually capable of. But he does actually come back, and he actually does get better when he's directing other stories such as Sea Devils and the Green Death, for instance. I like the story's plot. It's very interesting, and it's actually based on the whole story of the whole European settlers and the Native Americans. And you can actually see some aspects of that in this story as well. And it was quite cool. And I liked how the TARDIS was made operational again, considering the fact that it hasn't actually been fully used since the War Games. And so it's a nice little break from the Earth Exile stories, and the whole format of the Exile stories actually does return in the following story. The acting of the story, I would say, it was very good. I mean, certainly a lot better than Bloody Clothes of Axels. John Pertwee, brilliant as always, managed to do a good job, and he does great. He has good scenes, and I like the excitement he had when he was actually about to leave the TARDIS, which is actually juxtaposes to Drew being rather scared because this is her first TARDIS trip, and you can really see it was actually very well directed and very well acted by the two characters. And then I remember Joe was like, "Doctor, please stop this joke. I want to get off now. Stop it." And then the Doctor, I mean, he was unsure what was going on himself, but you can tell he was quite excited that he was about to leave Earth for a bit. and speaking of the Devil, Katie Manning as Joe Grant, she's brilliant as well. And as I mentioned before, just a few seconds ago, I liked how she was understandably scared of the TARDIS when the TARDIS actually takes off from unit headquarters. Jo is quite resourceful once again. I liked how she was able to free herself when the IMC capture her with another settler by the name of David Winton. But unfortunately, this is where my problem actually lies with Jo in this story, or well, how she's actually written. As soon as she frees herself, she's immediately captured again. So it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And she does get captured awful lot in the story. Remember, there was a time that when the Doctor and Jo broke into the Master's TARDIS, the Master actually found out and actually trapped Jo in this gas chamber, and then the Master would have killed her if the Doctor did anything stupid. And yeah, it did actually built some tension, but it didn't really make any sense to have Joe in that position. It didn't really like. It wasn't really. It was a bit out of character for Joe for me, but the Brigadier, even though he only appeared for like a minute in episode 1 and the last few moments in episode 6, I actually like Nicholas Courtney's line where the Doctor said, "Doctor, come back at once," and then from the Brigadier's perspective, he actually does, considering the fact that the TARDIS was programmed to return at the same second it left. And then it was also a funny scene as well when the Doctor and Joe are coming out of the TARDIS, and the Doctor was like to Joe, "Just don't bother explaining to him, he won't understand." It was a funny scene as well. So on to the side characters, which I say were rather decent and actually interesting compared to Close of Access once again. So first off, we had John Ash. He's the leader of the Settlers, but he was starting to become a bit of an unpopular leader when the settlements actually started to fail. He's played by John Ringham, who was in Doctor Who before. He was Titloxol in The Aztecs, and I think he played Hosea Blake in The Smugglers, and obviously both of those stories are William Hartnell stories. He was a good character, and he pretty much sacrificed himself to save the lives of everyone else, or to trick the IMT thinking that everyone else was dead, along with the ship, and that was pretty heroic of his character to say the least, and I really like that. And we also had Caldwell. He was a mining expert out of the IMC, and he was actually opposing to Dent's plans with the settlers, and he even tried to help the IMC. He even tried to help the settlers at one point, but obviously his loyalties had to lie with IMC, which he actually didn't want to. But then obviously when the IMC were defeated, he broke away from them and decided to join the colonists. And I liked his inclusion of his character. We also had David Winton, the guy that was held hostage with Joe. He was Ash's political rival, and he actually wanted to leave Usarius for another habitable planet. He actually does become the leader of Usarius after Ash dies. That is in that rocket. And we also have Mary Ash. She's the daughter of John Ash. She doesn't actually do a whole lot. I mean, she does get some good lines and a few bits of action. Well, not physical action, but stuff to do here and there. But the only reason I actually notice her because she's played by a young Helen Worth, who would go on to play Gail Platt in Coronation Street 3 years after the story, and she's still in Coronation Street to this day. I was out the making of this review, because let's see if you're watching this channel this video in a few years time and she's no longer in Corey. So yeah, she has been in Coronation Street for a very long time after this story. We also had Morgan. He was the second in command of the IMC, and he was the one that programmed the IMC robot to kill some of the settlers, and I actually liked his character. And he also, another reason why he stands out for me, because he's played by Tony Counter, who's actually been in Doctor Who a few times, and I think he was in Enlightenment. I can't remember, he was in another story, but I think he was in Enlightenment in the 5th Doctor Zero as well. And he also played Roy Evans in EastEnders. We also had the Guardian. He is the final survivor of the Xarian super race, and he was the overseer of the Xarian city. When the Xarians wanted to sacrifice the Doctor and Joe, the Guardian intervenes and lets them go on the behalf they do not return to the city. But obviously the Doctor returns, minus Joe, but the Doctor was with the Master as well, and then that's when the Master displays the Doomsday weapon. And then I think the Guardian actually gave the Doctor his permission to destroy the Doomsday weapon with the self-destruct button that was on it, because he didn't want the Master to get his hands on the Doomsday weapon. And it was an interesting character, considering the fact he was behind the wall for most of the time, but he did help with the resolution of the story. There were other characters as well, some interesting and some were interesting, but these characters I mentioned were the most interesting because it had a heavy focus on them. And so now we're on to the villains of this story. First of all, we have the Master, who's now back in his fully villainous role. He steals the Doomsday device after obtaining it from the Time Lord's files, and he offers the Doctor the chance to rule the universe side by side for no apparent reason, because as he was explaining the Doomsday weapon, he just randomly asked the Doctor, "We can rule the universe together for no apparent reason." Maybe it's because of their friendship in the past, I don't know. Because it isn't exactly established here, but the fact that the two were friends, but it just doesn't really make any sense at this point in time. And he pretends to, and the Master actually pretends to be the adjudicator to oversee the issues between IMC and the Xarian settlers. Roger Delgado actually does his best in this story. He does get some good moments in dialogue, even though he doesn't actually show up well into the story's progression. The second villain was Captain Dent. He was the leader of the IMC expedition to Xarius. He was very greedy and would even resort to murder to make his ends meet and to try and get his point across. He actually thought he was helping people. And there was a line they usually says, "If it's best for the Earth, or if it's best for you, Xarius is best for the Earth," or something somewhere along those lines. But I mean, the guy was actually pretty deluded into thinking he was actually doing stuff for the greater good, even though it is causing the loss of innocent lives, such as the Martins, for instance. And then he even actually threatened Joe's life on a few occasions. Morris Perry played Captain Dent really well, and he brought out the more sadistic side to Dent. And I actually thought Dent was going to die in the end, because obviously Doctor Who villains usually don't actually other than the Master, of course. We don't actually see Doctor Who villains survive. Maybe if they don't actually survive, they're probably just carted off somewhere in this. So I mean, he doesn't actually die. He's pretty much taken away to stand trial against the Adjudicator, and other IMC people actually died whilst they were fighting the settlers. So this story does have I do have a few issues with this story. I would say the story is very good, but it would have been probably John Pertwee's best if, one, the story was a four-parter, because I did feel there were some parts that were just padding for most of it, such as shortly after the Doctor actually arrived in Xarius. Yes, I think there's a lot of padding there. I think most of the pre-Master part of this story were pretty much padding, I think, to say the least. I think it would have been better to have at least introduced the Master on episode 2 and have the whole issues resolved into 4 parts. And speaking of the Master, I felt as it was pretty obvious that the Master was shoehorned into the plot of Colony in Space to fit the whole purpose of having like a Sherlock Holmes Doctor and the Moriarty Master for this season, and it made sense, but it wouldn't really have made much sense for the Master to have been in this story, because considering the fact that he's mentioned in episode 1 by the Time Lords and how he's stolen the Doomsday weapon, and then he doesn't appear until episode 3 or 4. I think towards the end of episode 3, he doesn't actually appear until then, and we actually find out he's the Adjudicator. And it was pretty obvious that he was going to be the Adjudicator, because we don't actually see him for most of the time. So until the Master actually shows up beforehand, this story was actually mainly about the conflict between the IMC and the settlers, and then when the Master comes in, the Doctor tries to prove to everyone that's not the Adjudicator, that's the Master, and it does lead to some disastrous consequences. And I would say that these thoughts actually do take away from the story, but I would say the story itself isn't actually that bad, and I would say it's one of the more enjoyable stories of season 8. Plus, it's a massive improvement to the Close of Axos. So to conclude, The Colony in Space is an underrated 40 classic, but it's still a good, fun watch, and I will give Colony in Space an 8 out of 10. My next review will be Season 8 finale, The Demons, so please look out for that one. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of Colony in Space and the review itself. Please let me subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and until then, see you later.